Hey there, everybody. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about A Rose for Emily. We have a few things going on, quite a few, right? There's a little bit of murder, a little bit of intrigue, all of that jazz, right? But I want to focus specifically on just a couple of things, okay? I want to focus on the setting and how that impacts Emily. I want to talk about about characterization of Emily herself, and I want to talk about the point of view in which the story is written. All right, so to start off with, I kind of want to talk about the time period, because the time period, it bounces around, right? It starts off with Emily being dead, and then we're back to her being alive, and then, all these things are happening. Well, I kind of sat down and I went through it to try to figure out what the time frame is. And so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm checking my notes here. So 1894, roundabouts, is where this starts, right? That's when Emily's father dies, and then we have the issue with the tax remittance, right? The town says, don't worry, Emily, you don't need to pay your taxes, right? That's when that starts, okay? And then we see a jump of about a decade, right? 1895 is when we see a modernization of the town, right? They start putting in gas stations and things like that. The town starts to change. Emily's house does not, right? So that's 1895. Okay, that's also when Homer Barron comes into play, right? Because he's the one who's helping build all those things. 1896 is when we start to see some stuff about the smell. I wonder what that smell could be. We all know by this point that the smell is Homer Barron. He's dead. She killed him. And you don't know what she does with the body before it ends up in the bedroom, but we do know that it smelled for a while. Okay, bad enough that the townspeople had to make a big deal of it. They had to go to a judge, and the judge was like, oh, how can you tell a lady to her face that she smells bad? Right? Good question. I mean, I don't tell people that. I just kind of internally hold my nose and walk away. Right? So that's the smell, 1896. Then we jump again almost a decade, 1904. This is when Emily kind of comes out of her shell just a peek, right? And she is 40 years old. She's doing the China painting classes. The public is able to come into the house, right? Bodies don't smell for almost a decade, so, people don't notice the smell anymore, right? So she lets people in. 1926 is when the town tries to say, like, hey, Emily, you really got to start paying your taxes, right? That's kind of when that begins. So we see that progression, right? She got just about 20 years of like living without taxes. But you know what? We all know in a modern setting, things need upkeep, right? There's not just carriages, right, driving on those roads anymore. There's cars and potholes happen. Sidewalks need repair, right? All of those things that we pay taxes for. This is around the time when taxes start actually going to infrastructure fixes, especially in an emerging town. So 1926, and then Emily dies in 1938. Okay, like I said before, this there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but that's kind of the general timeline from what I've figured out. Okay, so we have that. We also know that this is Jefferson, Texas. Okay? Now, the reason I say it's Jefferson, Texas, I know Faulkner writes about a different state like a majority of the time, but the reason I say Texas is because the Battle of Jefferson actually is real. Okay? And we can see that in paragraph 2, the anonymous graves of Union and Confederate soldiers who fell at the Battle of Jefferson. Right? But the Battle of Jefferson itself took place in Texas. Now, could Faulkner have decided, okay, well, I want to write about the Battle of Jefferson just in the place that I like to write about? Can this be a fictional Battle of Jefferson? Sure. But either way, Texas, or I think the other state that he likes to write about is Mississippi, I think. Either way, it's in the South, right? So it's held by Southern conventions. So in terms of time, we're running 1894 to 1938, and we have the South as the general location. Okay, whether it's Texas, whether it's Mississippi, we kind of have just an idea of what that looks like, right? And we can kind of see these southern values in the way that Toby is treated, right? He is a servant for Miss Emily, but there's a lot of language that suggests that, the South really hasn't changed all that much from the Civil War ending in 1865. So, we have that. Let's get a little bit more specific, right? That was the macro setting. This is now the micro setting, which is Emily's house. We know a little bit about it. It's old and it's foreboding, right? On the outside, it was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, not white anymore because it's old, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavy lightsome style of the 70s, set on what had once been our most select street. We find that out right away. Paragraph 2. This house was fancy. It's not fancy anymore. She let it go, right? So we know that. On the inside, we also know that it smelled of dust and disuse, a close, dank smell, that's paragraph 5. And then it was furnished in heavy leather-covered furniture. The leather was cracked, and a faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs when they sat down, right? So we know that, the inside's not really kept up much better. It hasn't been updated. This is very much like a family estate, and it was left, kind of in the time period when the family was living there. So we can see that indeed, Crace actually says the house is tomb-like, dark, damp, and dusty, right? Just the fact that it's tomb-like, Crace makes a really interesting point there, because is it actually a tomb? Well, yeah, because, Homer's been dead upstairs, right? Homer has been dead. It is his tomb. Whether it's an actual tomb or not, it becomes a tomb for Homer, right? So that's a really interesting way to phrase it. We also know that it's really mysterious, right? Because no visitor has passed since Emily ceased giving china painting lessons. We find that out in paragraph 5. The stairway, it looks up into shadows. That's paragraph 5 as well. So, whatever happens beyond the stairway, which I'd venture we don't want to know, is hidden from us, right? It's this idea that something is present, but we can't see it. So that makes it mysterious and dark, and it really gives us an interesting perspective. Now, we also know that Emily keeps a crayon portrait of her father above the fireplace. Now, that's a little, it's, I have it kind of pegged under mysterious. And is it? Yeah, I mean, he just kind of stares at things, right? He's still the man of the house, overseeing stuff. But, it's not strange to have portraits of dead family members, right? I mean, I have pictures of my grandparents around my house, and they've been dead for like a decade, right? Having a memorial makes sense. But also, Emily had an interesting and complicated relationship with her father, right? So that kind of lends to the mystery of it. He's overseeing things. He is, in a way, controlling her like he always did when he was alive. So we have that. We also see the house as kind of Emily's power, right? She has power that comes from the space that she lives in. Crace actually points this out. He says, the house is the source of Miss Emily's power. Inside the walls of the house, she's a strong woman, a killer, yet a woman falling in love. Outside the house, she's subject to the townspeople's gossip and criticism. In other words, while the house empowers Miss Emily, the town represented by its people and streets deprives her of the source of her strength, the class to which she belongs, and the power she has inherited from her father. Right? So the house kind of becomes her refuge and the place where Emily can be Emily, which is really cool. But from the outside looking in, the town says, okay, well, this house is gross. The relationship with her father was weird. They feel bad about her, all of that. So, we kind of see all of that happening. Now, we can see this kind of dichotomy, right? This sort of two ways of thought in terms of modernization, right? Emily is very much old school. She's happy to just I live in my old house, not update. I'm good. And we see the town working toward modernization, right? The construction company came with riggers and mules and machinery to pave the sidewalk. We find that out on paragraph 30. And then Crace points out, too, that the macrocosmic setting, right, the macro setting, of Jefferson responds to the fast changes. Emily's house remains static, firm, and isolated, right? So we have this, Emily's like, no, I don't want a mailbox. No, I don't want to pay my taxes and help upgrade the town, keep it modern. No, she doesn't want those things. Emily would be happy if life stayed in 1894 or earlier, right? So, we have this really interesting thing where she is a woman that is living, standing still, and everywhere else is moving on around her, okay? So we also see a modernization of thought, not just space. So the newer generation, we find, becomes the backbone and the spirit of the town, and the painting pupils grew up. This is the China painting pupils, the people who came to visit her house to learn how to paint China, and fell away and did not send their children to her with boxes of color and tedious brushes and pictures cut from the ladies' magazines. The new generation did not care about painting China. That's an old people thing, right? It's kind of like, you think about things that your grandparents and great-grandparents did when you were younger, and you kind of look back now and be like, would I waste my time with that? No, I have better things to do, right? And you know what? When we're old, there's going to be things that the future generations say, oh my goodness, why did they waste their time? It's probably going to be something like, I can't believe they're still texting, right? The people in the future, they'll be like sending messages with their minds, and us who are used to text messaging are going to be there kind of texting on our old school phones. Silly example, but I mean, that very well may come to pass. Who knows? So this modernization of thought that happens with basically every generation is happening here as well. And Crace points that out too. He says, not only does Miss Emily's house harbor slavery, but it also stands as a reminder of the previous class system, which has disappeared and been replaced by a more democratic system incarnated by the new generation, right? So it's this old aristocracy is now out of vogue, and the thing that's in vogue is this sort of democratic society and taking away the rights of someone to own another person. This is the new way. The new way. Slavery is bad. Of course slavery is bad. We know that. But Emily, obviously, she just never got the memo. She's still living in Civil War times, right? So we have that. We also see the setting of Homer's room, if we want to get like super micro, right? A thin, acrid pall, as the tombs seem to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as if for a bridal, right? This is set up for a wedding night. And Homer's just there, dead in bed, next to a hair with Miss Emily's, or next to a pillow with Miss Emily's hair on it. Right? Kind of weird, right? And we see all that happening, paragraph 57. Definitely strange. There is the hint that maybe there was some sort of necrophilia happening. It might not even have been quite as creepy as that, and could have just been that she just liked to lay next to him. No, you know what? I said that out loud. It's still creepy. It is still creepy. So we have that. We also see that everything is muted. The curtains of a faded rose color upon the rose shaded lights. That's paragraph 57 again. And then, same paragraph, among them lay a collar and a tie as if they had just been removed, which, lifted, left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded. Beneath it, the two mute shoes and discarded socks. Why does it matter that all this is muted and the colors are dimmed and all of that? Well, because that shows, again, that time doesn't pass, right? On some level, the fact that there's dust obviously shows that time is passing, right? But if dust is gathering, that means things are not changing. So if things don't change, does time make things move? Time exists because we make it exist. But there's no necessity to evolve with time, which is what Emily is refusing to do. Okay, so we have that. We also see Homer's bed and Homer in it. Right? What was left of Homer rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt. It had been inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biding dust. In the second pillow was the indentation of a head, and then we find out about the hair. Ugh, gross. But that's paragraphs 50 and 60. So we see that it's unchanging. Homer's body hasn't moved in a long time. The indentation of the head on the pillow next to him suggests that whatever was there, Emily, was there for a long time, right? Just being in this never-ending moment of Homer's death, okay? So those are kind of the ways that setting is occurring within the story. Now, let's move on to characterization, right? We find out characterization or character development. Of course, you can call it either. We find out about Miss Emily. Well, she is one prideful woman, isn't she? She wouldn't have accepted charity. We find that out right away, okay? And she doesn't respect authority. Just the fact that she says, perhaps he considers himself the sheriff. She's talking about, like, the actual sheriff. Of course he considers himself the sheriff. He's the sheriff. But she's like, I don't pay taxes. That's not my sheriff, right? So she is a very prideful woman who, she thinks she's above the rest, okay? We also see it in her interaction with the druggist. She's like, I want some poison. Yes, Miss Emily, what kind? For rats and such? And he's trying to give a recommendation. She says, I want the best you have. I don't care what kind. After the druggist named a bunch, he says, these will kill anything up to an elephant. But what you want is, and she's like, actually, I want arsenic. Give me some arsenic. Right? So if you don't think Emily knew exactly what she was looking to get when she walked into that druggist, she played that druggist. And what is a druggist? Basically, a druggist is like a pharmacist that also does like hardware stuff. Like these days you walk into a pharmacy to get stuff to like make you feel better. And you go into a hardware store for things that'll help kill pests and vermin and stuff. But at the time, anything chemical related was at the druggist, right? And medicines are chemicals on some level, right? Or it's some sort of reaction that helps create this herb or whatever. Someone that manipulates the natural world to either do harm or benefit, right? That's where you're going to see a druggist involved, okay? And, he tries to talk her out of it. I mean, this guy is the expert on the drugs. And she's like, no. I just want the arsenic. I played your game. I answered your questions, but, I already knew what I wanted, so just make it happen, man, right? That is kind of Emily's shining moment, if you will, in terms of showing us that she does not care. She doesn't. She doesn't care what the society thinks of her. She wants her arsenic. All right, and of course, why does she want that arsenic? To kill Homer Barron. She wants to kill him. And guess what? She does. Ha. So she also intimidates the druggist, right? So on top of telling him what she wants, she says, he says, the law requires you to tell what you're going to use it for, right? Because, if you're buying poison, you gotta, or if you're selling poison, the druggist needs to know, like, what's going on with this. So that way, like, no shady stuff goes down. It's poison, for goodness sake. And she just stared at him, her head tilted back in order to look at him eye for eye, until he looked away and went and got the arsenic, wrapped it up, and when she opened the package at home, there was written on the box, under the skull and bones, 4 rats. Good man, druggist. Nope, you didn't do your job, and you were the one who let her kill Homer. So, not really a good call. Not really a good call. In this day and age, there would definitely be some sort of charges pressed against Mr. Druggist over here. But at this time, it seems to just kind of fly under the radar, except for the townspeople who are telling the story, so somebody knows. But I guess nobody cares enough. So, we also see her denial, right? She is very good. Miss Emily is very good at being in denial, right? She refuses to accept that time is passing. For Pete's sake, she still has Toby living in her house, and, you could definitely say that he acts like a slave. We don't know whether he gets paid or not, but I would imagine she's kind of old school, so if she does pay him, it's probably not much at all. So we also see denial in terms of her father, right? The day after her father's death, all the ladies prepared to call at the house and offer condolence and aid, as is our custom. Miss Emily met them at the door, dressed as usual and with no trace of grief on her face. She told them that her father was not dead. She did that for 3 days. 3 days. 3 days. Just as they were about to resort to law and force, she broke down, and they buried her father quickly. Why would they bury him quickly? Well, probably so that she didn't say, oh, he's still alive again. So, we have, her just consistently in denial. 3 days of, your dad being dead in your house, and you're saying, no, he's still good. He's walking around. He just made omelets. That's definitely showing that there is something going on. And we'll be kind and we'll say that it's denial. Okay? Now, she also is in denial about other things like Colonel Sartoris' death. We find out that, Colonel Sartoris has been dead for about 10 years, and she's still saying, go talk to him. He knows about how I don't have to pay taxes. So it's very interesting how she's able to kind of push herself and push her ideas on other people, and other people seem to let her get away with it to an extent. It's not until she breaks down and lets the townspeople in that they can come in. They don't resort to law and order probably in a time period that they should have, because guess what? That body's starting to decompose by this point. So, you really want to think about it in terms of the time period. They don't have the same kind of embalming techniques and things like that. People died and they needed to be buried quickly. So the town also sees Miss Emily in an interesting way, right? The town pities her. So in paragraph 26, we find the house was all that was left to her. Being left alone and a pauper, she had become humanized. Now she too would know the old thrill and the old despair of a penny more or less. So they're like, sorry, Emily, you're kind of entitled. We're kind of excited that you now have to struggle. Sorry, not sorry. Right, so that's what we see from the town. We also see, for almost 6 months, Emily did not appear on the streets after Homer's death. That's when the townspeople knew that this was to be expected, as if the quality of her father, which had thwarted her woman's life so many times, had been too virulent and too furious to die, right? The thing that was holding her back from being able to marry sooner was her father. And as soon as she got the ability to go and be with Homer leaves, and it kind of brings all these emotions back up to the surface. So we have that. They're feeling bad for her. And they also, though, as they feel bad, also feel a sense of awe for her, right? Because it's kind of like awe, but also confusion. How can you be this way? Right? So she carried her head high enough, even when we believed she was fallen, as if she demanded more than ever the recognition of her dignity as the last Grierson. Right? She always acted with pride. Too much pride. Some would say hubris, right? Hubris brings a downfall, which I can say with pretty good certainty that, Emily does have a very big downfall in terms of, mental health and stability and things like that, right? You don't just go and kill someone you say you love if there's not some sort of issue, right? So we see that. And then as an older woman, they even talk about her as being a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. Now, an obligation is not something that necessarily has to be upheld. Just because you're obligated to do something doesn't mean you need to. But yet the town does. The town reacts to interact with her. Of course, you could say that they're just nosy, which is a viable analysis. But they definitely do see her as this old-timey person that has traditional values, that, she does have some drawbacks. And then, again, she would never have accepted charity. And about the tax documents, she just wouldn't pay them. That is some entitlement right there. The fact that, one, she wouldn't pay her taxes, and two, she got away with it. Excuse me? What now? Yeah. So, on the next bullet, I literally just have the word rude. She is. She's rude. She's obnoxious. She does not respect authority. That's Emily. That is Emily. All right, in terms of point of view, we only see Emily through a few different lenses, okay? We see her through the eyes of the aldermen when they come in to talk to her, right? These are the officials of the town. We see her through the eyes of the gossipy women, and then the eyes of the men who have a deeper understanding of propriety. Now, why do I say that? Well, because, these are the people who are talking about her. These are how we find out information about her. Who's telling this story? Well, the townspeople. People from these backgrounds, the aldermen, the gossipy women, and these men who understand propriety, right? So what you need to think about in terms of point of view, as I said in the point of view video, is, you have to ask questions over who's telling the story. So how do the townspeople know what they know? That's a good question. Are they just gossiping and all of a sudden, the fact that she has a dead snake in her backyard becomes something like totally different, blown out of proportion? We don't know, right? Is Homer's body really upstairs, or are they still hanging on like he disappeared, so he must be dead, right? We're not really sure. I think we can say that probably Homer was killed by Emily, but we can't necessarily believe everything that they say about her, okay? Do they really have intimate knowledge of Emily? I don't know, right? Because if you think back to the timeline that we talked about at the beginning, we really don't see her interacting with any of the townspeople for a long time, right? She's out of the picture when her dad dies, right? She has this sort of mental breakdown and she just kind of disappears from society. And then, for, what is that, like 10, 15 years, right? She finally starts coming out with Homer, but then she retreats again. Then she has China painting lessons a little bit. But then she just kind of retreats into her house again. So do people know about her? Maybe in specific times, like time categories. Do they know a lot about her? I would say no, definitely not over this 40, 43, 44 years. They see some, but not everything. So how do they fill in the gaps? I'm going to leave that question to you. How do they fill in those gaps? And ask yourself, do the townspeople have an agenda? If they do, what is it? And are they biased against her? This I will give you a little bit of a hint on, and that is maybe, right? She does have this sort of traditional authority. Whether they agree with it or not, she does have it. So, we have Emily, who is someone who's definitely not, I wouldn't say liked, but I also wouldn't say hated. She's more pitied and more looked down upon because of how she behaves. And they are confused by her. So what happens when someone is confused by something that they see and that, really they don't really feel too connected? Sometimes there's some creative narration, let's say, make up a little bit to fill in these gaps here and there. Okay? So, you really want to ask yourself, are they biased against Emily, or are they just telling everything straight up like it is? And that's what I'm going to leave you on. Okay? So think about these things as you're reading any story, really, in terms of narration and who is telling the story. But when it comes to setting and characterization, this is specifically for Emily and arose for Emily. And man, this is an interesting story. There's a lot to dig into, a lot of exciting things that happen. Exciting, good or bad, I leave that up to you. But hopefully this analysis has helped you. Okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. And I will see you next time. Bye, guys.